What is that? 62%. That's the number of players who have never beaten Mog in Elden Ring, and we know because we checked the achievements. Now, why does that stat matter? It's because you need to beat him as well as Radahn in order to access the newly released Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. 62% of the player base didn't even complete the things that mattered in the base game, yet they're on social media crying about how FromSoftware is gatekeeping them from the conversation. Since the release of the DLC, the internet has been split. Critics are calling it the best DLC ever, with the Metacritic scores being through the roof. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have the Steam page being review bombed. Check the Steam reviews and you'll find people complaining a laundry list of issues that they have with Shadow of the Erdtree. But here's the real question. Is this DLC actually too brutal, or are people just crybabies? Cause let's be real, FromSoftware isn't known for holding people's hands when it comes to their games. So buckle up as we take a deep dive into this situation, and stick around until the end because I will be sharing my personal thoughts on the DLC. But before we get into it, first let's dive a little bit more into why people are review bombing Shadow of the Erdtree. Because of the mob nature of the internet, these days Steam reviews don't usually mean much to me, but for the masses, it's often used to gauge the quality of a product. And in only a short amount of time, this game went from being a public darling to the latter. Practically overnight, Shadow of the Erdtree went from overwhelmingly positive to mixed reviews faster than you can say, "Get good." So what's got everyone's panties in a bunch? First, you'll find many complaints about the bosses. People are saying they are harder than trying to understand the plot of Kingdom Hearts. One review on Steam mentions the bosses having erratic movesets, rendering his ability to have fun. In specific, you'll find people bitching about long combos, AoE spam, and punish windows shorter than me even when I have my Tims on. And I'm not sure why, but I get the feeling folks were in search of a fair fight, something FromSoftware games are known to be allergic to. Some have even gone as far as saying that leveling up won't save. Even high-level characters are getting their cheeks clapped without the new Skidoo fragments. It's almost as if the game wants you to play it and explore instead of just trying to speedrun the bosses for internet clout. But that's just the game in general. PC players are also experiencing a unique kind of pain exclusive to their platform of choice. One reviewer said there's constant micro stuttering and frame drops. The game also freezes and there's long load times, which makes it difficult to enjoy the game. A quick glance at the reviews and you will see Shadow of the Erdtree is turning some people's PCs into nuclear bombs. Meanwhile, console players are having the time of their life. PS5 and Xbox Series users are giving high scores because once again, the performance issues mainly affect the PC version of the game. So what's the deal? Is this DLC actually harder than like Steel? And are the issues on PC the real deal, or just a vocal minority blowing things out of proportion? I know one thing's for sure, FromSoftware is not about to make this game easier. The game's director Miyazaki straight up said that lowering the difficulty in Shadow of the Erdtree would mess up the whole point of the game. Basically, he said, "Get good, scrub." But that's just how I feel. I'm sure many of you are curious to know what are my thoughts on the DLC, so let's shift this video towards my impressions. Before we do, quick disclaimer. The following video is not a full review. I'm not done with Shadow of the Erdtree at the time of this recording, so this video contains my first impressions and just some general info. How I feel now may not be how I feel upon completion, so feel free to take everything I say with a grain of salt. That being said, here's everything you need to know before you install Shadow of the Erdtree. Shadow of the Erdtree is the first and reportedly the last DLC expansion for FromSoftware's Elden Ring. It's out now for download on PC, PS5, and Xbox Series, and it currently retails for $40 and it's packed with content. On average, reports claim it's taken people at least 30 to 50 hours to complete, but I've seen videos of people getting 70 to 120 hours out of this expansion. Matter of fact, to give you an example, famous streamer Kaisanat has spent 60 hours on the final boss alone, and at the time of this recording, he still ain't beat it, so he brought a therapist on his stream to help with his mental health.
What you need to do, instead of being angry that he's being annoying and angry that he's kicking your butt, be excited to win. That's the energy you need to focus on. I'm gonna beat this game, I beat these games, I know I can do it. I need you to get in that positive, confident, resilient energy that you have, because you do have it. You beat 7 games thus far.
The reality is that this isn't your traditional DLC that's overpriced and undercooked. You get what you pay for here, and what you paid for is essentially a whole new game that builds upon the foundation that is 2022's Game of the Year. This feels less like DLC and more like Elden Ring 1.5, and that's because reports claim that Shadow of the Erdtree launched with 100 new weapons, 8 new fighting styles, 10 main bosses, and over 40 side bosses. Now that would impress most alone, but what impressed me most is the sheer scale of it all. Reports claim that the DLC's new map is half the size of the original game, and it might not seem that way when you first boot up the game, and that's because while the base game has a map that reaches far and wide, Shadow of the Erdtree's map sports a map that reaches high and low. Verticality and depth is the name of the game, and I love it. Make sure to climb that mountain and also make sure to trek deep into the tomb. The map doesn't seem big at first glance, but if you explore the DLC, it'll reward the player with paths that get deeper and deeper and deeper, just like your mom's. The scale isn't the only thing that amazed me either. FromSoftware has some of the best art design in the business. They do this dope thing where they strike a balance between an ominous and scary environment, yet it remains beautiful. There's no way you don't stop in a moment just to take it all in when you reach the cerulean portion of the map. The dreary mood combined with the gorgeous blue lighting of the flower fields will have you wishing this game had a picture mode. Also, Miyazaki put a picture mode in the game. That's an easy patch. And that's just one area that I brought up. This game is full of them. Venturing off the beaten path doesn't just lead to vast new biomes, but also tombs. If you played any FromSoftware title, then you know what to expect here. You're gonna be trekking through tons of tombs riddled with tough enemies and booby traps that are bound to make you laugh when you run into them. Per usual, expect a boss fight at the end of most of these tombs that will mollywop you, but also reward you with sweet loot if you persevere. This part of the game is nothing new, but it is done well. It feels like an extension of the original game. These tombs often use the same color palettes, but where they differ is the creativity and the layout and the enemies. Basically, if you like the base game stuff, you're gonna like this too. The tombs aren't an afterthought, just don't expect anything mind-blowing either. What I will say is different is how they approach the boss fights. I don't think it's been a single boss that I fought in a tomb that didn't instantly pull up on me. I think this was done on purpose to keep the players on their toes, but also to combat some of the cheese like the magic move, Comet Azure, where you can just shoot a Kamehameha wave. You gotta power that stuff up, but that ain't gonna happen. You're gonna have to earn your hits this time around. Those on-site fight moments lead to some of the most hilarious moments if you're not ready.
Yeah, no spoilers, no spoilers.
Oh boy. Oh! Hold up, I gotta lock in chat. Exploring will also reward the player with Skidoo fragments and revered spirit ashes. This is the DLC's new power scaling metric. Although the game's director Miyazaki recommends players be at least level 50 before tackling the DLC, the real rule of thumb is find those fragments scattered throughout the land. Skidoo fragments increase your attack power and defense, and revered spirit ashes enhance the power of your spirit ash abilities and the health on your horse. You can finish the DLC without these enhancements, but your journey will be significantly harder. I've seen complaints online that this feels like artificial difficulty. People have builds that they've grinded hundreds of hours on, and now you have to go collect these random orbs just to get your power back. I think the argument is that this feels a bit cheap in like Metroidvania games where the protagonist loses all their cool abilities at the beginning, so now you have to adventure to go get them back. I'd say I halfway agree with that sentiment, but then I got over it because I planned on exploring anyway, so naturally you're gonna find those upgrades. They're not hard to find, just check your corners. This new power scaling system really is gonna only affect people who are just trying to speed run through the main bosses so they can flex their big E-penis online.
Hey yo, what the fuck?
Speaking of bosses, as stated earlier, reports claim there are 10 main bosses and 40 side ones. Now, at the time of this recording, I've only fought one of the main bosses and 8 side ones. I've spent most of my time exploring and searching for new weapons and armor. That being said, the few bosses that I have slayed, I can confirm they were no slouch. Miyazaki claims a lot of the main bosses are on a similar difficulty as Millennia and other late game bosses in the base game. So I find it interesting that there's been an outcry on social media from a group of gamers who've never beaten Mog, Millennia, or Radon. It's one thing if you missed Mog, admittedly I did too, but I booted up the game after the DLC was announced 3 months ago and I slayed Mog in 45 minutes because the articles claimed you needed to beat him to be ready. If you're in that same camp as me, I'm not mad at you. He was easy to miss. I'm more so speaking to the people who just can't beat him or Radon. Why do you want to play the DLC? If you can't beat the base game, why hop into the DLC where it's harder? I would love to know in the comments below.
Can you help me understand the inflexible position that you're taking?
Jokes aside, killing off a treacherous foe is as satisfying as ever. Every battle plays out the same. First you're excited, then you're downloading the opponent, then the frustration kicks in because of your poor execution, but eventually you put it all together and you overcome the odds. The result is a satisfaction that most games just don't give this day and age, especially because each battle is unique and large in scope. For those who don't get it, nothing makes a person feel better than actually slaying a dragon. Yeah, there's a new power scaling system, but I really like the changes made to the traversal. In the DLC, potion restores are far more frequent. Shadows of the Erdtree rewards players for taking out mobs of enemies by giving them constant restores on their health and mana flasks. Because of this, I noticed I spent less time at grave sites and more time exploring, which led to more of those epic boss fights. It's those little things that I've noticed about the DLC that makes everything come full circle. There's an excitement to discovering new armor, weapons, and Ashes of War, mainly because of the cool abilities and the passes they contain. I found this sword venturing off the beaten path called the Star Line that basically turns your Tarnished into Master Yoda. What? And that's just one example. There's a new hand-to-hand combat style, new magic options, swords, new axes, you name it. Between the base game and the 100 new weapons added to the DLC, there is a build here for everyone. And the best part is that it isn't hard to upgrade anything. The DLC is Ultra Instinct generous when it comes to dropping upgrade materials. I'm not exaggerating when I say, I swear I pick up smithing stones like every 5 minutes just clearing out random trash mobs. And I think in the coming months and years, that's going to be the main appeal of this expansion, putting together the coolest builds that nobody thought of and doing runs with them as well as fighting in PvP. It's just too bad that the netcode in PvP is still horrible. The lack of update to the netcode isn't just the only thing that I dislike about the DLC either. Shadow of the Erdtree, at least on PC, is not the most optimized. I had next to no issues running the base game on my PC, but this DLC can be a little shaky, and I'm not the only one saying this. Feel free to do your research. From my experience, I'd say it ran well 80% of the time, but I would experience some frame drops here and there, plus the game crashed on me, but it wasn't enough to make me quit because it wasn't happening frequently enough. That is, until I got to Renala, the Twin Moon Knight. It's a tough boss fight that requires the player to master a dance with her, and this dance requires quick reflexes. But the problem is, all the particle effects she puts on the screen started making my game run like a slideshow, so it made a hard game even harder because pulling off precision became a chore. I pray they clean this up with some patches over time because things could definitely be better.
Tracking, oh my god. Frame drops and tracking. It's like hot Cheetos and Takis.
The other thing I wasn't a fan of in this DLC is the lack of achievements. Now, this is not a deal breaker because it's something that could easily be patched in later. I'm just nitpicking. But in its current state, it does suck knowing all the major bosses plus the major side ones like Millennia in the base game had achievements, but none of the bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree do. Miyazaki said that some of the hardest bosses they've ever made are in this DLC, and I have friends that have fought the final boss and confirmed this for me, so why not give the players some type of proof that they overcame that obstacle? Now you're gonna have people running around claiming they beat the DLC, and we have no way to find out whether it's true or not, and we know a lot of y'all are fraudulent because you couldn't beat Radon and Mog. This is especially egregious because so many people are complaining this game is too hard, and my stance is that yeah, it's hard, but I've managed to overcome everything because my fundamentals are strong. People call Elden Ring the easiest FromSoftware game, and the more that I play it, the more I start to understand why. It really depends on how you play it. The game gives the player so many tools such as the Mimic tier, overpowered spells, summons, co-op, that it's fooled so many people into thinking they're better at the game than they actually are. And listen, I'm not knocking anyone for using what's in the game. Use it. You paid for it. Enjoy your game. But you also have to understand that when you take the easy way out, it can become a crutch. Millennia was one of the hardest, if not the hardest boss in the base game, and according to my Steam achievements, only 35% of the players beat her. Miyazaki said in numerous interviews before the DLC came out, the DLC bosses would be on par, if not harder than her. So I have to present the question to those who are complaining about the difficulty. Why did you buy the DLC if you couldn't beat the base game fully? And it's a lot of you out there. Remember, 35% only beat Millennia. Those optional bosses were not optional. They were skill checks. And that's not to say I haven't encountered any bullshit in the DLC. I have. And yet, I've still managed to overcome because my focus was on improving myself and not the difficulty. So I said that to say this. I'm enjoying myself, and I have no problem recommending Shadow of the Erdtree. If you're a fan of the base game, you're gonna love this DLC because it's even more of what you love, plus there are tweaks to the formula. This DLC is so good, I'm curious if the DLC can be nominated for Game of the Year. I mean, there's enough new content here that you can argue it could be its own separate game. If it can't, well, it's definitely gonna be nominated for Best DLC or Best Ongoing Game, but only time will tell when award season comes around this December. And while we wait for award season, do me a favor and laugh at my pain. I put together a funny moments rage compilation of my first few hours on Shadow of the Erdtree, and to watch that, all you gotta do is click the card on the screen.